Welcome, everybody. We're coming back to finish up Unit 1 here in the Fundamentals book, and where we had left off, and the units that I have created here in my course match up with the uh, Xcode 13 teacher's version of the Fundamentals book. So Swift Programming Fundamentals, I think is what Apple calls it. I am in the teacher's guide. As far as I see it, we've completed areas up through areas 1.5. And at this point, what they're trying to do, and I want you guys to have this understanding that the way that this course starts out is by reviewing all the stuff you kind of already know. And you've noticed that already. As I mentioned before I hit the record button, as we kind of review all the stuff we already know, we're also peppering in new concepts and making it deeper, more complete knowledge as we go forward. Um, we just did that with if statements, with flow control, right? Including the ternary operators and stuff. And if you look at your Finder inside the student files here, which is where I've kind of broken it down in this way, right? So these are my student files expanded. We are moving into area number 6 right now, which is debugging. In the book, the numbers do match up. They talk about controlling flow, and that was that playground that we had on all of that. Now, here in the book, as you can see, this is once again the teacher's version of the book. They look at kind of like the vocabulary that they hope that you guys know, and I'll just have you have a really quick look at that. Some of this stuff might resonate off the top of your head, but some of it might not. And so our hopes is eventually you'll be able to look at a list of vocabulary like this and go, oh yeah, I know that. Right, that's the hope, right? If that's not how you're feeling right now, don't worry, that will come. I think I've talked about all of this stuff, right, in class here, one way, shape, form, or another, and maybe not called it exactly by these names, but I think we've talked about just about all of these things here. The goal in this area, at least, is to be able to describe asset catalogs, capabilities, and deployment targets, use the filter bar to find stuff quickly, describe the following content areas: navigator, debug, assistant editor, version editor. So in other words, like look at the interface of Xcode and go, oh, that's where I do this, and that's where I do that. That's basically what that means. If you are looking at taking the certification exams from Apple, though, and this one is a pretty challenging certification exam, they do spend a lot of time during that exam going, okay, where's the navigation area? Or where is the assistant editor? That kind of stuff. And you have to like know which icon it is on the screen to make that. Now, if you're running Xcode, of course, you just pull it up on screen, and you hover over something, and I'm gonna, bring Xcode up right now. And it'll just tell you what it is, right? I am going to be opening an Xcode project, so I'm going to close that splash screen, and I am going to come here to first time debugging, and I'm just going to pull that project up. But the grand point, really, of what I'm trying to say right now is, if I want to know, for example, where or how to like show the inspector panel, right? I can just hover over a switch and it'll tell me. If I'm working in a graphical mode, for example, which often we will be, one of our key areas is the attributes inspector. And I always think of this as a properties panel, and that really kind of comes from all my days of like working in Visual Studio on a PC. And they have a properties panel, and it's usually the bottom right corner of your screen. But basically what this is anytime you're clicking on something in a graphical view like this, there's a bunch of properties that go with that object. And you can see what their settings are here and change them, right? Any of the properties that you can change by hitting a drop down or typing in a value or hitting a slider or something like that, you can also change through code, right? And that's really kind of an important thing. When you're building things, I think it's easier to use the attributes inspector, but do know what that name is. So when we throw that name around, that's where you find it. If you don't remember the names of stuff, you know what? Do what I do. Hover, you know, oh, this is the identity inspector. Great, thank you. Right. Or this one, which is the what do they call this one? The size inspector, right? That one I kind of know. It looks like a little protractor. We also have the connections inspector. So when we have like IB outlets and actions, you know, this is where they're shown. So all of these have special meaning and features. Here's a help area, right? There's this one here, the history inspector, right? We haven't done any changes, so you wouldn't see anything here. And then you have this one, which is called, and you can tell I don't know what it's called. So I'm hovering to get the name. Give me the name, please, Apple. Okay, the file inspector, right? And so, no shame that you don't remember what the stuff is called. Apple does have all these like cryptic little icons and stuff. And knowing that you can trigger these side panels on both sides, right, is helpful. On the left side, we have the project navigator, the source control navigator. So this is like if you're working with GitHub or whatever. That's not really a super concern for us here. We have a, what do they call this? A symbol navigator, find, replace tool, etc. But as with all of these, you know, don't hesitate to hover and figure out what they are. You'll also notice they have a whole series of icons down here. Some of these become really handy as you get a little more advanced in like what you're doing in here. When I was doing my level 3 training, we used this tool quite a bit, which was we would take a bunch of user interface components and then we would embed them in other structures so that we can control the structure at the same time, right? You also have like these layout tools, right? Some are auto layout tools. We have our constraint tool. We haven't really played with that one too much. We'll get more in this course for sure. You know, the alignment tool, and then the frame tool here. These are very, very helpful when you're working graphically, by the way. And you can do some things here a lot more quickly than using some of the other panels I've discovered, right? They're kind of touchy though. And you'll see, I mean, I don't have anything on the screen to really show you at the moment, but when we get to using these tools, I'll try to point out some of their features. The other one that's kind of important too is this asset library up here. Right, so whenever, anytime you want to add some sort of a thing to the graphical view of your program, that's the tool that we use to pull stuff in, right? And you can, once again, drag and drop, double click, whatever, but that's where you find everything. If you just click on the plus sign, you can see like a complete list of all the different types of graphical tools that you can add. Some are very simplistic, some are complex. What you will notice is as I scroll down the list, I mean, there's more than a few, right? Some of it really is very intuitive, right? Some of it is not. You will also notice that they have like weird things that you can add here. We haven't even dabbled with this stuff yet, right? But for example, if I want to add like a part of my app that pulls in a WebKit view, by the way, WebKit stands for Google Chrome based browser tools, right? So that's WebKit. So I can add like a little browser window to my app. Pretty cool, right? Or if I wanted to do, you know, augmented reality, that type of thing, or I mean, heck, think about like some of the tools that you use in apps pretty normally and don't even give it much of a second thought. And a lot of those are just kind of default tools that we can pull in and drop into an app and utilize as an API with no need to having to code it in any way, right? Map tools, browser tools, file uploads, you know, all those kind of things. Those are all in the library. So just familiarize yourself with that and don't be afraid to explore. A real fun thing to do, real frankly, is if you just want to kind of learn how some tools operate or what they look like even, is you can just create a new app and just drag a bunch of stuff in from the library and see what it does, you know, or at least familiarize yourself. And then when you have a functional reason for it, you'll know where to find it and maybe even how to operate it a little bit when you get there. So that's kind of the grand thing there. Now, we are, you know, kind of taking a look, right, at like how to operate Xcode. So this is hypothetically a reminder on how to do it, right? We intelligently started the semester by doing apps from last semester that we never finished. And real frankly, I thought that was a great way to start because we got right into building apps again. And then it was like, oh yeah, oh yeah, oh yeah. You know, it was like a whole bunch of that. And that's really kind of the grand point here once again. All right. One of the points that they are making here in the book, and you can see that I have that up on the screen here, is make sure that you don't ignore the fact that Xcode's got a help mechanism built in, that it also has that option click where you can like hover over stuff and click and pull up the documentation. And there's also a video here to kind of review how to work with Xcode if you kind of forgot. So you can pull that up. You know, this is, you know, custom Apple content here, right? So here's the video. You can see it's 54 minutes long.
Jesus.
And they kind of, it's pretty complete. They go through like how to use Xcode and its tools and its environments and all little panels and gadgets and whatever. So if you ever need a refresher, this is actually a really good video. I'm obviously not going to play it here. I just want to make you guys aware of the fact that it is out there and available. I should probably also get all my email stuff off the screen on that side. Now, we are going to be working on this next little tidbit here where we are going to start looking at this app here and some of the areas of the app, you know, so like common components of the app, like we're getting used to these at this point, right? But there's an app delegate, a scene delegate, and thus far we haven't tinkered with these at all. And that's pretty typical, right? You're not usually messing with those two. Where we usually do most of our work is in the view controller. This is where we will write our code, right? And you can see just by switching here, it is throwing errors and they're looking for fixes. And we're going to address that in a second. But most of the work that we will typically do will be in the view controller, in the main storyboard. We may add assets. There's also this other storyboard here that's called the launch screen. And this is something we have not dealt with yet. But think about like when you launch an app on your phone, very often you get a little bit of a splash screen first, and then the app loads up. And that's what the launch screen is, right? Is that area. The other thing that can happen is when you're writing Xcode apps is that you may add additional Swift files to help support the application on purpose. And then depending on the type of interfaces that you're working with, you will work with different aspects of all of these code files. So that aside, what they're going to have us work on next is basically you know, building, running, debugging an app, right? And what we're going to work on here first is basically figuring out how we're going to clear all the errors that we're going to find in this app. And you'll notice, like right off the bat, I'm clicking into the view controller. Didn't do anything because it came this way. So the first exercise is to figure out where the problem is, and then remove the problem code or fix the code or whatever. Now, this first one, and let's just, I'm going to go bigger on my screen here, and I'm not going to go full screen, but real close since we're recording, right? And you'll notice that line 5 there, I do have an error popping up, and it says expected, and I'm noticing it's a curly bracket, but it's also an opening curly bracket in body of function declaration. So is that really the problem? Are we missing an open curly bracket here? Is that what you guys are seeing?
No.
No, what do you think we're missing, Jomar?
The shit, I forgot what it's called. The bracket after load between the
Yeah.
I forgot what that was called.
You're catching it, right? So sometimes when the compiler is catching an error, and this is very hard to teach, by the way. You know, it's making it to this spot. You can see it's underlining it, right? And then it throws the error. And the error, I mean, it's guessing is really what it's doing, right? Um, what I always try to tell my students is when you find an error in code, instead of looking at right at the spot where it's pointing, sometimes it's more wise to look at the spot before it, like a line or two above or nearby. And what Jomar is actually or accurately picking up here is we do have the viewDidLoad load function. This is a standard one that's included in all these programs. And what's really missing here is the closing parenthesis, right?
There.
Because yeah, this is a function or a method, as we call it. And in order for the statement to be complete, really, we need a closing parenthesis. So let's just drop one in and see if that fixes the error. Okay, so that looks like it fixed that error. And now I got another error. And this is often what happens, right? Now, interestingly, we didn't see this error until we fixed the other one. But one tip I always give people when they're doing any sort of troubleshooting with code and they're reacting to error messages from their IDE, never ever start correcting the mistakes from the bottom up. You always work from the top down. I mean, you just saw an example here. We fixed one mistake, but then a different mistake happened after, right? And sometimes you will have a mistake in your code, and then that first mistake will generate 20 others. So you don't start fixing the bottom one, you fix the top one first, and maybe the 20 will go away. We don't know that for sure at this point. All right, now this one, why is this one throwing an error? What do you guys think? It says cannot find some method in scope.
The D is missing a method.
Yeah, I mean, they're not using the entire name, right? Really what they're trying to do is call the method called some method, and they're misspelling it, right? So the fix for this one is to put in the letter D, right? And now we're waiting. Now it's throwing another weird error, and it says will never be executed. Now notice this one's not red, right? So the other ones, when we have errors that are red and I go hit that button to run the program, to compile it, red errors will prevent the program from running. Okay, that's not good. A yellow error, it's just saying, hey, this isn't great, but it'll work. Right? Yeah, not a good scenario. But it's saying here, this will never be executed. So it's looking at this line of code. It's not expressed incorrectly. It's written correctly. It's just a line of text inside of a print method. Why will this never be executed? Right. All right. So it might take a moment to recognize it because this is not something we normally do. And that is when we write an if statement, normally we write a Boolean expression of some sort that resolves to true or false. And the one thing we don't talk about in coding is I can just say true in this spot. So if I said if true, this code would execute, but right now we're saying if false. We're not really setting up a condition that makes any sense, right?
Right. Yeah.
Right. So, but we are setting it to false, which means it will never trigger to true, and this code will never run. And it's not just a print statement. Like, so for example, if I put this here, that will never execute should go to the next line, right? Has nothing to do with that statement. So if I remove that comment, it has more to do with if this ever triggers to true. So like one thing that you can do is write a statement that will trigger it to true. All right. So what, so I could say, if sample equals sample, and that I need a double equal here, right? If I'm checking for truth. Now, will that fix the code? Now, it doesn't have to be this particular statement. I just picked something I knew was true because I had a variable here set to, sample is equal to sample. And if sample is equivalent to sample, then the code will execute. Yeah, that took care of the error message. All right. So that's one way to fix that error. Do we have any other errors here? Seemingly not, right? If I was to go ahead and run this, would it run? Would it build? Let's see. It says build succeeded. What's going to come up on the screen? Well, my simulator is hiding there in the background, but it's loading up the operating system. It's pulling up that main screen. What did I tell it to put on the screen? Well, I told it to put absolutely nothing on that main screen, and that's exactly what it did. So it's not doing anything wrong. But oh my gosh, something happened here. It seems to be crashing, right? Right, and it's trying to basically put stuff on screen that can't get on screen. It's really kind of the exercise here. The thing that they're doing, and this is kind of weird. So this is where we're kind of digging a little bit into kind of the back end part of Xcode here. So now we're in the app delegate file, and this is stuff that normally we would not touch, right? So we wouldn't touch this to try to make it work. But there's an error in the code here we can fix. All right, so take a look at like the highlights. So first it says thread 1 fatal error, can't remove first element from an empty collection. All right, so without really knowing what code is being written here. So all right, this is kind of interesting, but what they're doing here in the code is they're setting up an array that holds strings, and then they start putting stuff in it. Okay, well, they put in one item, some text that says uh-oh, and then they run a command that says remove first. Okay, which means they just got rid of this. Then they run that same command again, but what's happened? Now the array is empty, right? And so it cannot execute that command, which is to remove the first item in the array. So one way you could fix it is you could add something, like that. So you could add another element to the array. Now, if you give it a second, now, okay, granted, the application is running. We should probably stop it from running. But if you tried to run this again, that should go away because now we remove the first. There's still one left. So this would become first and it would remove that and it should work. So let's see if that's true. Let's hit the run button. See if it gets stuck in the same spot. Right. And are you guys noticing that there's no problems? It just loaded up and ran. Right. And it's outputting to the console and I have no error messages. Right. So what's kind of neat here, right, is to recognize something like that. And in this case, the code wasn't put in a spot where you would think to look at it, but that doesn't matter. What matters is that you find the error, try to understand what it's saying, and try to fix what's causing it. And that's what I did, right? I have no idea why they put this code here, aside from showing us how to do that, right? But it is working. Now, if I'm going to run a program and it runs successfully, and then I get the output in the console here, because that's what we told it to do, right? We usually also see the error messages up here. And if you guys remember when I ran it the first time and it crashed, it had all sorts of stuff over here. But you notice here it's throwing in a thing, and this is a yellow warning, right? It's not a fatal error that keeps it from running, but it says variable sample was never mutated. Consider changing to let constant. So all that's saying, I will stop the program from running. But all that's saying is back in the view controller here, we declared this to be a variable, right? And you see, after I run the program, it's giving me the error message. But okay, am I using this at all? Well, I'm printing it. And then I'm running an if statement where I check it, but I'm never changing it. So there's no reason for it to be a var. Now this is a little bit unusual because most other programming languages, like if you assign a variable and then you run your program and you never change the variable, that programming language and that engine that runs it doesn't care. They don't give you this message. Like if I do this in Java, it's like, okay, whatever, you created a variable, you didn't use it, that's on you. You know, they're not like telling you that, hey, make it more efficient. What Apple's telling you though, real clearly, is that this would be better as a let because you have no plans in your code to change it ever. Now, if you know later on you have plans to change this, well, then ignore it. Who cares, right? You know you're going to change it. If you know that you're not, well, then I can get rid of this var, make that a let. The program will still operate the same, and then that error message goes away. And although it's goofy, I'm running it again, letting it build. I want to see, does it generate any other warnings or errors? And notice it ran clean. There's nothing here that's throwing an error, right? Everything worked out. That's ideally what you want, right? It is not unusual when you're writing apps of any sort, doesn't matter what languages or tools you're using, that you'll create stuff, you think you're going to use it, and then you discover, oh, I guess I'm not using it. I guess we don't need that. Then you can either comment it out or just delete it. Or if you think you need a constant and and then you find out later you're going to change it and you switch to a variable, oh well, or the other way around. Those are all scenarios that you would want. But the function of a programmer, real frankly, you guys, over and over again, is that very often you're going to be running code that isn't right before you get it right, and dealing with how to contend with those errors as you're building as you go. And that's kind of what this unit has been about. The other thing that they do want to point out is the fact that when you're working in Xcode, if you want to get documentation about something, right? So like if I come to, let's say, view did load and I want to learn something about it, I want you to remember that we have this option key, and you see like when I press my option key and I'm over the code, it changes to a crosshair. But if I'm over something like a keyword, like the UI view controller, see how it changes to a question mark. And then in that mode, you can option click and it pulls in the definition from the Swift developer documentation that talks all about this tool, probably in more detail than you ever want to know, right? And in many cases, it's completely irrelevant to what you're doing. But in other cases, if I'm like on the func here, and I want you to notice as I'm over the func, right? I'm over the keyword func, like I'm going to get the definition for that. No, it's trying to give me the definition for the whole function. And so anywhere that I am in the title here and I click option to click, well, it doesn't do it with override, but it sure does it with these, right? And if I click it, well, this is something that I created, or okay, I didn't create it, the Apple people created it, but it was manually created and added to the program. This doesn't come with a bunch of documentation. Isn't that interesting? Right? Why? Because it's a self-created function or method, right? So there is no documentation. If I'm going to use a tool that is a standard part of the library, the print statement's a great example. Well, that one's got all sorts of information, right? Or if I'm looking at importing the UI kit, well, that one doesn't have any quick help, but it does have documentation that you can look up, and then you can kind of deep dive. And and this documentation is built into Xcode. I want you to keep in mind though that there's websites for it too. So you can go to the Swift website and look at the documentation there. I think what Apple's trying to encourage you to do is try to use all the internal help tools first, right? If you guys have learned how to code in other languages, so like real famously, like in Java, we always coach our students on knowing how to pull up what we call the Java docs, which are the documentation documents for Java that pull in dynamically. And when you can look at the documentation for something right in the same environment where you're writing the code, that's really helpful, right? Because that way you don't have to like leave your tool, go out to the internet, look something up, end up on Stack Overflow or wherever you end up and try to look stuff up. That it's right internal to the product. And sometimes the questions that you have are, well, how many parameters can I pass, or what does it do? You know, that kind of stuff. And knowing that you can look stuff up like on the fly like that, very, very helpful, by the way. Right. So that's really what this section's about, is like knowing how to find the documentation. And they, you know, they reinforce the option click and option double click. And see what it says here. Ask the students to read documentation directly from generated header files. Invite the students to option double click a symbol for a property or method to enter its header view. And I don't know if I've ever done that. So let's see if I can. Well, I guess normally I'm not seeing that as a double click. Yeah, I'm not triggering whatever magic they're talking about there, but just know that you can get to the documentation that way, or through the help menus. They will go through this other last section here where they talk about the basics of building an interface and some of the tools that we used, including outlets and actions and where those sit normally inside of Xcode. And I think that we're all, I think, pretty comfortable with that. I think what we're going to do next here, and this is just kind of goofy, mind you, but they do have this guided project here. This is not an assignment, by the way. The assignment was already the debugging that we did, but I'm just putting it out there that they have this thing where, you know, and we joked about this during our training, that when iOS first came out and, you know, smartphones were a brand new thing, I don't know why they didn't think about this. Like now you buy a smartphone and there's like a system level app that can turn on a flashlight on your phone, right? So you can see where you're going in the dark. But prior to that, what people were doing is they would just create a blank app where the screen would go white, and then you would just take your screen and you point it at something and use it as a light. And that's what this project is. So if you want to like follow along, it's really pretty simple. In fact, this app that we have in the background here already does it, even though there's like unnecessary code in here. It already is a blank screen app, so it's kind of like already built. That's kind of the point. I find it really fascinating though when you stop and you know, look back at the history of it. Like whoever was smart enough to create the very first flashlight app probably made a bunch of money off of it, and then everybody else that followed made zero. You know, it's like, hey, you know, all I need to do is bring up a bright screen, you know, and heck, people were paying for that. I can't even believe it, right? And now you would never even think about paying. All right, that's all we're going to cover in this section. From here, we're going to be moving on to Unit 2, where we are going to start learning about this thing called UI Kit. So this video will end here. And hopefully you picked up some good little tips about Xcode and how to do debugging.